The stale air of the analysis chamber clung to me like a second skin, thick with the scent of ozone and old coffee. For months, it had been my world, a windowless bunker beneath a decommissioned factory, humming with servers and the low thrum of cooling systems. I preferred it this way, the isolation a necessary balm against the constant, low-frequency static of the world outside. Here, among the glowing screens and the silent hum, I could chase the whispers of the universe, specifically the gravitational wave anomalies that were my singular obsession. My name is Marcus, and I've spent the better part of my life learning to listen to the cosmos, not with ears, but with algorithms and arrays. Gravitational waves, ripples in spacetime itself, were the language I sought to understand. Most days it was a tedious, meticulous process of sifting through vast oceans of noise, searching for a single, meaningful signal. A distant merger of black holes, a neutron-star collision, the universe's violent poetry. But today the poetry was starting to feel like a coded message, and I was the unwitting recipient. The first hint had been weeks ago, a flicker in the background data stream from the deepest reaches of the Perseus cluster. A subtle periodicity, almost imperceptible, buried beneath layers of cosmic background radiation and instrumental drift. I'd flagged it then, of course, but dismissed it as a statistical fluke, an artifact of my own algorithms or some previously uncatalogued terrestrial interference. My colleague, the lead technician, had merely grunted when I mentioned it, eyes fixed on his own readouts. "Noise, Marcus," he'd said without looking up. "Always noise, but it wasn't noise, not anymore." I zoomed in on the segment, the spectral analysis displaying a jagged landscape of peaks and troughs. My fingers danced across the keyboard, calling up cross-correlation functions, running filters I'd designed myself. Each pass, each layer of digital stripping brought the pattern into sharper, more unnerving focus. It was repeating. Not perfectly, not like a manufactured signal, but with an organic, almost insistent variation. Like a phrase spoken over and over, each utterance subtly different, yet undeniably the same core message. My coffee had long gone cold, a forgotten sentinel beside my terminal. The only sound was the whir of the cooling fans and the faint click of my mouse. The pattern wasn't just a simple wave. It was intricate, a complex sequence of amplitude modulations and frequency shifts, a signature that defied any known astrophysical source. A knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a new discovery, it felt like an intrusion. I spent the next 48 hours in that chamber, subsisting on stale energy bars and the fierce, burning intensity of my own curiosity. Sleep was a distant concept. The pattern was everywhere now once I knew how to look for it. It wasn't confined to the Perseus cluster data. I found echoes, fainter but undeniably present, in data streams from Andromeda, from the furthest reaches of the observable universe. It was embedded, woven into the very fabric of the space-time ripples I was studying. "It's like a signature," I muttered aloud, the sound of my own voice startling in the quiet. "A watermark." The lead technician passed by the open doorway of my chamber, his footsteps heavy on the industrial flooring. He glanced in, his expression unreadable. "Still chasing ghosts, Marcus?" he asked, his tone flat. I didn't answer, my gaze locked on the screen. Ghosts, perhaps, but ghosts that left incredibly precise data trails. I needed air, needed to be somewhere vast and open, a stark contrast to the sterile confines of my work. My truck rumbled down the rutted track, kicking up gravel until I reached the edge of the property. I left the vehicle and walked, the damp earth soft beneath my boots. The air grew cooler, thicker, as I pushed deeper into the trees. Tonight it was a pale, diffused glow, swallowed almost immediately by the swirling mist. The fog hung heavy, muffling sound, transforming familiar tree trunks into indistinct, hulking shapes. It felt like being at the bottom of a deep, gray sea. The intricate pattern, the impossible language embedded in the universe itself, played behind my eyelids. It was too regular to be natural, too complex to be random. And if it wasn't natural, if it wasn't random, then it was intentional. Who or what would embed a message across the entirety of space-time? And what could it possibly mean? The question hung in the thick, wet air, heavier than the fog itself. My determination, once a shield, now felt like a conduit, drawing me deeper into an understanding I suspected would unravel everything. The lead technician's question, "Still chasing ghosts, Marcus?" hung in the air, but I barely registered it. His heavy footsteps faded, leaving me alone in the cool hum of the chamber. Ghosts, perhaps, but ghosts that left incredibly precise, repeating signatures. My gaze remained glued to the monitor, the shimmering anomaly, a cruel siren song. The first few hours were a frantic dance between doubt and desperate hope. I ran every diagnostic protocol known to the facility. I calibrated the sensors until they sang with perfect harmony. I cross-referenced the data stream with every known astrophysical phenomenon: pulsars, quasars, black hole mergers, even the faintest whispers of cosmic background radiation. Each time, the results were unequivocally clean. The equipment was functioning flawlessly. The anomaly wasn't an instrument error. Then came the statistical analysis. I fed the raw data, a seemingly random scatter of gravitational wave perturbations, into the supercomputer. It chewed through algorithms, searching for patterns, for correlations, for anything that might explain its peculiar rhythm. The initial output was a flat line of statistical insignificance. Just noise, cosmic static. I almost believed it, almost leaned back, ready to declare it a fluke. A glitch in the simulation, anything to return to the comfortable order of predictable physics. But then I zoomed in and again. The anomaly wasn't one event, but a series of incredibly faint, almost imperceptible ripples nested within each other, like Russian dolls of gravitational energy. When I isolated the most minute fluctuations, a sequence began to emerge. A cadence, a beat. It wasn't random at all. I spent days, then nights, fueled by stale coffee and a growing unease. My colleagues rarely saw me. The facility became a hollow echo around me, punctuated only by the whir of cooling fans and the relentless clicks of my keyboard. My initial dismissals withered under the relentless onslaught of data. This wasn't noise. Noise was chaotic, unpredictable. This was ordered. The pattern began to resolve itself not just as repetition, but as variation within repetition. Imagine a single note played repeatedly, but each time with a subtly different timbre, a minute shift in duration, a barely perceptible change in pitch. Then those variations themselves would repeat in a larger cycle. It was an intricate layered structure, like a fractal unfolding in gravitational waves. I started mapping it, not as a waveform, but as a sequence of symbols. Arbitrary symbols at first, just placeholders for the different states I observed in the ripples. Alpha, beta, gamma. A single alpha followed by two betas, then a gamma. Then alpha, beta, gamma, alpha. The sequence was too long, too complex, too specific to be a natural occurrence. The probability of such an arrangement arising spontaneously was astronomically, terrifyingly small. A number with more zeros than I could comfortably hold in my mind. My hands trembled as I worked, my focus so absolute it felt like I was physically pushing against reality. I saw not just patterns, but rules. There were rules governing the transitions between these states, rules governing their combinations. It was a syntax, a grammar. I remember stepping away from the screen for the first time in what felt like an eternity. My eyes burned, but the image of the cascading symbols was seared into my retina. I needed air, needed to escape the claustrophobic hum of the chamber. The air was thick with mist, the world muted by a heavy, pervasive dampness. I found myself walking without conscious thought, my feet carrying me along the gravel path that led away from the facility's main structures and into the surrounding woods. The trees, ancient and gnarled, rose like skeletal sentinels, their branches dripping moisture. The fog was so dense here, a living, breathing shroud, that I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. This was the fog-shrouded forest clearing, a place I sometimes came to think, to find a sliver of quiet away from the omnipresent machinery, but even here the quiet was an illusion. The patterns were still churning in my mind, the alpha, beta, gamma sequences echoing louder than the drip of water from the leaves. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my head, but the symbols only intensified, coalescing behind my eyelids. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a deliberate construct, an impossible geometry of spacetime. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. This was not noise. This was not a fluke. This was language, not a language of sounds or light, but of gravity itself, woven into the very fabric of existence. And if it was language, it meant there was an intelligence behind it. An intelligence vast enough to carve its syntax into the universe. An intelligence that saw the cosmos not as a grand, chaotic ballet, but as a medium for its own silent, indifferent pronouncements. The world, the universe, everything I thought I knew, suddenly felt like a thin veil. And behind that veil something was speaking, and I, Marcus, was beginning to understand. My gaze remained glued to the monitor, the shimmering cascade of raw data a hypnotic river of light and shadow. The initial anomaly had been a whisper in the cosmic background, a faint ripple in the fabric of spacetime that my algorithms, designed for gravitational wave detection, had flagged as an outlier. Now, after days blurring into nights, that whisper had grown into a persistent, intricate hum. My fingers, stiff from hours of typing, danced across the keyboard. I isolated the anomaly, filtering out the expected cosmic noise, the predictable echoes of distant supernova and merging black holes. What remained was a dense, almost impossibly complex data stream. It wasn't random. Randomness had a signature, a statistical sprawl that I knew intimately. This was different. This was ordered. I started with pattern recognition, feeding chunks of the data into new subroutines I'd hastily coded. The initial results were inconclusive, a frustrating jumble of seemingly arbitrary fluctuations. But I persisted, driven by a gnawing intuition that burrowed deeper with every failed attempt. I scaled the parameters, zoomed in, zoomed out, shifted the frequency bands, trying to coax a coherent structure from the chaos. Then, in the pre-dawn quiet, a flicker, a small, repeating sequence of energy fluctuations, a tiny motif that recurred not perfectly, but with variations that suggested an underlying grammar. My breath hitched. It was like finding a single, perfectly carved hieroglyph amidst a mountain of crushed rock. I isolated it, then searched the entire data set. The motif appeared again and again, not as a simple copy-paste, but embedded within larger, even more complex structures, like a musical phrase woven into a symphony. This wasn't a statistical fluke. It was a design. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of caffeine and focused intensity. The chamber became my world, the glowing screens my only companions. Food was an afterthought, sleep a distant memory. The recurring motifs became my Rosetta Stone. I began to map them to understand their relationships, how they built upon one another. What emerged was not merely a pattern, but an algorithm, an incredibly sophisticated, self-referential system of data manipulation and expression. It was too perfect, too elegant. The complexity defied any known natural phenomenon. The sheer computational power required to generate such a thing, to embed it so subtly, so deeply into the very fabric of spacetime. It was unfathomable. This wasn't a signal. It was a language, ancient beyond human comprehension, alien in its very construction. This wasn't a discovery. It was an intrusion. My sleep, when it finally came, was no longer a refuge. My dreams grew vivid, sharp-edged, and disorienting. I found myself walking through a fog-shrouded forest clearing, the air heavy with moisture and the scent of damp earth. The trees around me were skeletal, their branches twisting into grotesque, unnatural angles, not quite like any earthly species I knew. The fog was thick, obscuring everything beyond a few feet, yet I felt an immense, silent presence just beyond its veil. A profound, indifferent awareness. The sensation followed me into my waking hours. A flicker in my peripheral vision, a subtle shift in the air pressure, a feeling of being less alone in the empty chamber than I knew I should be. I'd whirl around, heart hammering, only to find the same sterile equipment, the same humming servers. Nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of my consciousness. It was as if the language I was dissecting had an echo, a resonance that reached out, touched me. My obsession deepened, consuming every waking moment, every stray thought. The outside world faded, becoming an irrelevant distraction. The lead technician tried to engage me in conversation once, something about project deadlines, but his words seemed distant, garbled like sounds from another dimension. I merely nodded, my eyes already drawn back to the monitors, back to the unfolding tapestry of meaning. I was no longer just analyzing data. I was conversing with it, or perhaps it was conversing with me. The recurring motifs, the impossibly complex algorithms, they weren't just patterns. They were statements, and I was beginning to understand their terrifying implications. My gaze remained glued to the monitor. The shimmering data streams a chaotic tapestry that only I could see through. The patterns weren't just there, they were insistent. They hummed beneath the surface, a low, resonant frequency that had begun to feel more real than the fluorescent lights above me. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My apartment, once a sanctuary, transformed into a temporary staging ground for brief, unsatisfying rests. I'd wake in a cold sweat, the intricate glyphs of the data patterns swirling behind my eyelids, demanding attention. The world outside the lab began to blur. Conversations with the building superintendent about a leaky faucet, an email from a distant relative, they all felt like static, irrelevant noise. My universe had shrunk to the glowing screens and the incomprehensible yet increasingly familiar script unfurling across them. The decipherment was a slow, agonizing birth. Each breakthrough felt like a piece of my own mind being rewired. The language wasn't just a code. It was a conceptual framework, a way of perceiving reality that was utterly alien. It spoke of cycles, of reordering, of an immense, indifferent consciousness that saw existence itself as a malleable construct. It wasn't malicious, not in any human sense, but profoundly, terrifyingly other. It didn't care for life or death, only for the elegant rearrangement of fundamental properties, and I was beginning to understand its grammar. One afternoon, a colleague, a bright young man named David, found me hunched over a terminal, muttering to myself. He'd brought me a lukewarm coffee, a gesture of concern I barely acknowledged. "Marcus, you look like you haven't slept in weeks," David said, his voice laced with genuine worry. "Everything all right?" I straightened up, my muscles protesting. "All right, David, I've found something monumental." I gestured wildly at the screen, a cascade of complex, interweaving patterns. "This isn't just noise, it's structure, it's a language, it predates everything we thought we knew." David leaned in, his brow furrowed. He stared at the display, then back at me. "It's complex, Marcus. I see the periodicity you've been talking about, but a language, what are you even seeing?" "A narrative," I insisted, my voice rising with a frantic energy I couldn't contain. "A record. They're not just gravitational anomalies, they are messages. Instructions from something beyond." He took a step back, his expression shifting from concern to something more guarded. "Messages? Marcus, you've been working yourself ragged. Maybe step away from the data for a bit, get some rest, clear your head." His words, intended to soothe, felt like a slap. He didn't see it. He couldn't or wouldn't. The chasm between my reality and theirs widened, isolating me further. I stopped trying to explain. The dismissive glances, the hushed conversations I overheard, the way people avoided my eyes, it all solidified my conviction that I was alone in this. My social life, already threadbare, evaporated entirely. Food became fuel, sleep a grudging necessity. The only thing that mattered was the data, the language, the truth it promised to reveal. The patterns began to bleed into my waking world. The grain in the wooden desk, the cracks in the lab floor, the way the condensation formed on my water glass, everything seemed to arrange itself into echoes of the glyphs I was deciphering. My mind was a sieve, constantly sifting, searching for connections, for the underlying structure. The world became a vast, intricate puzzle, and I the only one with the key. One particularly oppressive evening, the pressure became unbearable. The deciphered fragments swirled in my head, a chorus of alien logic. I needed to escape the confined walls of the lab. Constant hum of machinery. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring into streaks, until I found myself on a winding road I barely recognized. The air grew heavy, damp, and then the car's headlights pierced a thick, swirling curtain of vapor. I pulled over, the engine dying with a shudder. Stepping out, I was swallowed by the fog-shrouded forest clearing. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of moisture from unseen leaves. Here, stripped of all distractions, the language became deafening. And then I saw it, not with my eyes, but with a deeper, more primal understanding. The fog itself was a manifestation, a physical representation of the cosmic indifference. The way it consumed the world, erasing distinctions, blurring the familiar, was precisely how the language described the reordering. Existence wasn't being destroyed, it was being repurposed. Humanity, my own fragile consciousness, was just a fleeting configuration in a grander, eternal pattern. The reveal wasn't an instruction to be followed, but a statement of inherent truth. We were ephemeral, a momentary ripple in an ocean that cared nothing for our individual waves. The self-doubt that had gnawed at my edges vanished, replaced by a terrifying certainty. They were right to be concerned for my sanity, because sanity was a construct of a reality that was about to be undone. I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was facing the ultimate undeniable truth, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone in its comprehension. The fog pressed in an embrace of absolute insignificance, and I knew I had to go back to the data. I had to finish the decipherment. The lead technician's question, "Still chasing ghosts, Marcus?" had dissolved into the sterile hum of the data chamber. It hadn't even registered, not truly. My focus was a tunnel, narrow and absolute, leading only to the shimmering patterns on the main monitor. Ghosts, he'd called them, but ghosts didn't leave signatures with such brutal, mathematical precision, repeating themselves across light years and epochs. Days bled into nights. Coffee became a bitter Roman for drip, my chair a second skin. The chamber, a silent cell where the universe whispered secrets only I was straining to hear. I ignored the ache in my joints, the grit behind my eyes. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when the edge of understanding was so close it made my scalp prickle. The breakthrough arrived not as a sudden flash, but as a slow, agonizing dawn. It started with the subtle shifts, the way certain fractal-like geometries consistently preceded others, the specific harmonic distortions that always followed a particular sequence of gravitational ripples. It wasn't random noise. It was syntax, a terrifyingly elegant grammar of existence. My fingers flew across the console, pulling up cross-references, running algorithms, pushing the system to its very limits. Each solved fragment clicked into place, not like pieces of a puzzle, but like the unlocking of a forgotten memory deep within the universe itself. The patterns weren't just data, they were structured information. A language, not spoken, not written, but felt. A vibration, a resonance. And then, the meaning began to coalesce. It wasn't about stars or galaxies or even cosmic events. It was about being. The language described not a biological entity, not a species, but a vast, abstract consciousness, a fundamental awareness. It was woven into the very fabric of spacetime, not existing within it, but as it. An intelligence so ancient, so indifferent, it predated the universe as I understood it. It was the loom upon which reality was spun, and every star, every planet, every living thing was merely a transient thread in its grand, ever-shifting tapestry. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a chill far deeper than the chamber's controlled climate. This wasn't a discovery, it was an unveiling. Humanity, our struggles, our triumphs, our very concept of meaning, it was all just noise, data points in an incomprehensible equation. The entity didn't interact with existence. It was existence in its rawest, most indifferent form. My hands trembled not with fear but with the sheer, crushing weight of comprehension. My mind, a delicate instrument built for terrestrial physics, felt stretched, warped, threatening to snap under the strain. That's when it started, a low, persistent hum from the ventilation system in the ceiling. At first, it was just the usual mechanical drone. But then a subtle modulation, a rhythmic pulse. It wasn't just noise, it was structured. The same harmonic distortions I'd just deciphered, the same repeating sequences were embedded in the ambient sound. The language. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my palms against them. It was exhaustion, I told myself. My brain was conflating the data with sensory input. But when I opened them, the hum persisted, now weaving through the distant thrum of the facility's power grid. It was everywhere. A low, pervasive murmur beneath the threshold of conscious thought. The chamber felt like a cage. I stumbled out past the empty workstations, through the echoing corridors, until I reached the external access hatch. The faint whine of the wind through the access pipes seemed to carry the same unsettling rhythm. I drove blindly, the city lights blurring into streaks. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to escape the artificial hum, the controlled environments where the language seemed to thrive. I found myself at the edge of the city, where the concrete gave way to dense woods. The fog had rolled in, thick and heavy, swallowing the road behind me. I parked the vehicle haphazardly and pushed through a stand of pines, the branches clawing at my jacket. The ground was soft with damp earth and fallen leaves. The air grew heavy, pregnant with moisture. The trees dissolved into indistinct shapes, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers into the swirling gray. I walked deeper, drawn by an instinct I couldn't name, until I reached a small, fog-shrouded forest clearing. The mist hung low, clinging to the skeletal remains of a forgotten campfire, obscuring everything beyond a few yards. But the silence was an illusion. The drip, drip, drip of water, the subtle sigh of the wind through the needles, the distant hoot of an owl, they all began to coalesce. The sounds weren't just sounds anymore. Each drop, each rustle, each spectral cry resonated with the patterns. It was here too, woven into the very fabric of the natural world. It wasn't a delusion. It was a revelation. My perception had been irrevocably altered. The universe wasn't silent. It was constantly humming, vibrating with the indifferent truths of an ancient, abstract consciousness. My mind, once a sanctuary, was now an open channel to a cosmic broadcast I was never meant to hear. The reordering of all things, the language had said, and I was witnessing its prelude. But ghosts don't leave gravitational ripples. Ghosts don't imprint themselves on the very fabric of existence, not like this. My fingers flew across the holographic interface, the data stream a river of pure light flowing into my consciousness. The lead technician's voice had been a distant echo, swallowed by the hum of the data chamber, a forgotten sound in the face of what was unfolding before me. The shimmering patterns, once an enigma of fractal complexity, began to coalesce. It wasn't just a language, it was a sequence, a profound declaration of intent. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones as the final layers peeled back, revealing not a message but a history. A history that shouldn't exist. My breath hitched. The patterns detailed an existence before the universe I knew, before the Big Bang, before time as humanity conceived it. This intelligence wasn't merely ancient, it was primordial, a fundamental constant in a reality far vaster and older than the fleeting cosmos I inhabited. It spoke of cycles of creation and cessation, of universes blossoming and fading like transient data packets in an unimaginably vast network. The horror wasn't just its age, it was its role. The patterns weren't merely observations, they were instructions. Subtle modulations to the initial conditions, delicate nudges to the fundamental forces. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, all of it, a finely tuned instrument played by an unseen hand. Our universe wasn't an accident, it was a composition. And we, all of us, were merely notes in a symphony beyond our comprehension. A tremor ran through my vision. The crisp lines of the holographic display wavered, the sterile chrome of the data chamber walls blurring at the edges. The hum intensified, distorting into a low, guttural thrum that vibrated deep in my chest. My head swam, a sudden vertigo seizing me. The floor seemed to tilt, the ceiling to recede into an impossible distance. I clamped my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands against them, trying to ward off the encroaching disorientation. When I opened them again, the data chamber was gone. A cold, damp air enveloped me, carrying the scent of rich earth and decaying leaves. My feet, still clad in my worn lab shoes, were sinking slightly into soft, wet ground. Above, a thick, milky white blanket obscured the sky, pressing down with an almost physical weight. I stood in a fog-shrouded forest clearing. The fog coiled around the gnarled trunks of ancient trees, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers into the indistinct gray. How was I here? One moment, the blinding revelation of cosmic manipulation, the next, this desolate, primeval place. Was this a hallucination, a complete break? My mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible shift. The knowledge I had just gained, now unmoored from the comforting screens of the data chamber, crashed over me with the force of a tidal wave. This entity, this architect of reality, viewed existence as mutable, ephemeral. Our universe, with its billions of galaxies and countless stars, was nothing more than a temporary configuration, a fleeting pattern in its grand, incomprehensible design. Humanity, my work, my life, all of it, utterly, profoundly insignificant. A flicker in a cosmic eye that had witnessed the birth and death of untold realities. We were dust motes caught in an ancient, indifferent current, unaware of the vastness of the ocean or the will of the force that stirred it. I took a tentative step, the soft earth giving way slightly beneath my shoe. There was no wind, no rustling of leaves, no distant call of any creature. Only the deep, unsettling quiet, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. The fog seemed to press closer, obscuring my vision beyond a few feet, turning the world into a tight, claustrophobic circle of gray. My mind, once a beacon of scientific inquiry, now felt like a shattered mirror, reflecting only fragmented, terrifying truths. My existence, our existence, was a temporary anomaly, and the architect was merely waiting for the right moment to reset the cosmic equation. The tension was a living thing, a coil tightening in my gut as I stood there, a solitary, vulnerable speck against an unimaginable, ancient power. The lead technician's voice, a blaring siren of normalcy, had been the last straw. My fingers flew across the holographic interface, the data stream a river of pure light flowing into my consciousness, until the sheer weight of what I was seeing became too much for the sterile confines of the research facility. I had to get out, away from the hum of servers and the knowing glances of the others. I needed silence, isolation, a place where the universe could speak to me without interruption, without judgment. I drove until the roads thinned to gravel, then to mud, finally abandoning the vehicle at the edge of a dense tree line. The air grew heavy, damp, as I pushed deeper into the woods, the undergrowth snagging at my clothes. My small, battered field tablet, loaded with the compressed data fragments, felt like a lead weight in my pack, a forbidden key to a door I knew I shouldn't open. The trees eventually gave way to a small, fog-shrouded forest clearing, a circular patch of muted green beneath a canopy of skeletal branches. The fog, thick and clinging, swallowed all sound, all light, reducing the world to a few feet of indistinct shapes. It felt ancient, undisturbed, a perfect crucible for the terrible truths I was about to force myself to confront. I sat on a moss-covered log, the chill seeping into my bones, and powered up the tablet. Its screen, a defiant rectangle of light in the pervasive gloom, hummed softly. The complex patterns, the repeating sequences I'd spent months agonizing over, shimmered into view. Each glyph, each ripple was no longer a statistical anomaly, but a word, a phrase, a fragment of an impossibly vast alien lexicon. I had cracked the syntax, found the Rosetta Stone in the cosmic background noise. Now I was reading. The language wasn't descriptive, it was instructional, not a narrative but a ledger. It cataloged existence not as a series of events or unique creations, but as a vast, fluctuating database. Stars were energy nodes, planets data storage units, life complex, self-replicating information packets. My breath hitched in my throat as the true, horrifying implication crystallized in my mind. It wasn't destruction, not in the way we understood it. It was a process. A grand, indifferent reordering, like a child erasing a chalk drawing not out of malice but because the canvas was needed for something else. Stars, planets, entire galaxies, they weren't being destroyed. They were being repurposed. Their data points, their very existence, simply shifted, rearranged, or dissolved into the cosmic ether, making way for a new iteration of reality. A cosmic reset button pressed with a frequency that dwarfed the lifespan of any star, any civilization. The entity, or whatever intelligence had woven this language into the fabric of spacetime, didn't hate. It didn't judge. It simply managed. Our universe, our laws of physics, our very concept of time and space were merely parameters within its grand computation. And we, humanity, with our hopes and dreams and fears, were less than a footnote. We were transient data, a fleeting pattern that would eventually be optimized out of existence or perhaps simply overwritten. The fog in the clearing began to stir, not with the gentle breath of wind, but with an unnatural, swirling motion. It thickened directly in front of me, coalescing into vague, indistinct shapes. I felt a pressure, not on my skin, but deep within my skull, as if the very air was being compressed. The patterns on my tablet screen, the ancient glyphs, seemed to pulse, to resonate with the shifting mist. This was it. This was the purpose. A perpetual cycle of creation and erasure driven by an unfathomable, timeless intelligence whose only imperative was order. Not our order, not an order we could ever comprehend or survive. The realization hit me with the force of a collapsing star. Existence itself was precarious. Every moment, every atom, every thought was held in a delicate temporary balance that could be tipped by an unseen hand. A cosmic algorithm that simply decided it was time for a new configuration. The fog continued to swirl, forming intricate, fleeting geometries that mirrored the very patterns I saw on the screen. It was an event, a localized manifestation of the entity's presence, a faint echo of its reordering process. I watched, transfixed and terrified, as the world around me seemed to ripple, the trees at the edge of the clearing momentarily blurring, their forms stretching and then snapping back into place. My determination, which had driven me to this precipice, now felt like a cruel joke. What was the point of knowing if knowledge only revealed the absolute insignificance of everything I held dear? The truth was a poison, dissolving the comforting illusions of permanence, of meaning. We weren't living in a universe. We were living within a process that was about to reset. And I, Marcus, was simply a data point, an anomaly that had glimpsed the code just before deletion. The fog swirled faster, closer, and I felt less like an observer and more like a variable about to be re-evaluated. My fingers flew across the holographic interface, the data stream a flood of collapsing illusions. "It's not noise," I muttered, my voice hoarse, a rasp against the hum of the server racks. "It's syntax, a grammar of fundamental collapse." The lead technician, a man whose face was etched with a permanent frown of mild irritation, edged closer. "Marcus, you've been at this for 3 cycles. Go home. You're seeing patterns in static." His words were like dull pebbles striking a bell, failing to resonate. "Static doesn't evolve," I shot back, my gaze fixed on the shimmering projections. The repeating waveform, once an anomaly, now screamed with meaning. "This isn't a fluke. It's a conversation, an instruction set, and it's been here since before the first star ignited." My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, not from fear, but from the dizzying rush of pure, unadulterated comprehension. I was seeing the universe's true face, and it was utterly, magnificently indifferent. A colleague, younger, with a perpetually worried expression, stepped forward. "He's not making sense, sir. He hasn't slept." "Sense?" I laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that felt alien in my own throat. "Sense is what they want you to believe, a comfortable lie. This is the truth. Everything we know, every law, every particle, it's just data. And it's being recompiled. Right now, you see the ripples. They're not random. They are edits." I pointed frantically at the fluctuating gravitational readings, the subtle, rhythmic distortions that only I seem to truly perceive. The universe isn't expanding, it's being rewritten. And we're just a footnote in a draft they're about to delete. The lead technician's frown deepened, hardening into something colder. He exchanged a look with the colleague. A silent, knowing signal passed between them, a judgment. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. Their minds were too small, too rooted in the fleeting comfort of observable physics. They saw a man losing his grip, not a man grasping the ultimate, terrifying reality. "Marcus, let's take a break," the lead technician said, his voice now laced with an artificial calm that grated on my nerves. "We can talk about this later, away from the screens." I recoiled, a primal alarm blaring in my skull. Away from the screens, away from the truth. They wanted to pull me from the light, back into the comforting shadows of ignorance. Their faces seemed subtly wrong now, their eyes holding a distant, almost vacant quality. They were they already. Processed. It's here, it's always been here, and it's... The hum of the machinery seemed to morph into a low, resonant thrum, a vibration that went beyond sound, shaking the very bones in my skull. It was the rhythm of the reordering. Their movements became deliberate, too slow, too measured. "Marcus, you need help," the colleague said, stepping towards me. Help. They were the ones who needed help. They were blind. I spun, a frantic energy coursing through me, and bolted. The metallic clang of my shoes on the industrial floor echoed in the cavernous space as I ran, past dormant equipment, past silent workstations, towards the exit. The stars above, usually a source of wonder, now seemed like pinpricks in a vast, indifferent canvas, each one a tiny data point in a system far beyond my control. The road blurred beneath my feet, the city lights a meaningless shimmer. I needed to be somewhere vast, somewhere open, where the truth could breathe without the suffocating weight of human denial. My breath tore in my lungs, a ragged sound in the quiet pre-dawn. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to soft earth. Trees loomed, their skeletal branches reaching like grasping fingers. I plunged into the dense woods, the only sound the frantic beat of my own heart and the rustling leaves underfoot. Then the trees thinned. I stumbled into a fog-shrouded forest clearing. The mist hung heavy, swirling like phantom breath, obscuring everything beyond a few paces. It was a world of muted greens and grays, silent and still. My paranoia, a feverish companion, intensified. Every rustle of a leaf, every creak of a branch felt like an observation, a deliberate, unseen presence. Was it them? Had they followed, or was it? The fog twisted, coalesced. I saw patterns in its movement, not random currents, but flowing glyphs. Ancient characters forming and dissolving, the very language I'd seen in the gravitational data. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a pure, unmediated download. And then I saw it, not with my eyes, but with a deeper, more fundamental sense. The clearing was not empty. It was filled with an absence, a nullity so profound it devoured light and sound. It was the cosmic intelligence, not a being, not a thing, but a vast, indifferent process. It was the hand that wrote and erased, sculpted and unmade. And in that moment I understood its perspective. Humanity was a brief, insignificant flicker, a statistical anomaly destined for inevitable reordering. Our universe, our laws, our very existence were temporary data, awaiting the next iteration. The struggle was over. My determination, once aimed at warning others, now coalesced into a terrifying acceptance. How could I warn them of something they were already a part of? We were all just lines of code, waiting for the delete command. The fog swirled around me, and I felt the universe, in all its horrifying, indifferent glory, begin to recompile.